And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Tonight's weather again showing a garden variety, fairly large storm here over the eastern southeast Bering Sea. Front pushing eastward, bringing clouds and rain across southern Alaska. Kind of a break here in the central interior. Developing snow with a winter weather advisory out for the eastern Brooks Range on out to the eastern Boulevard Sea coast. For snow and blowing snow could pick up 2 to 3 inches over the next day or so up in that area, with winds gusting to 40 miles an hour. And as you can see, very tight gradient here along the Brooks Range. That will greatly reduce visibilities there, possibly along the Dalton Highway in blowing snow. Mixed precipitation south of the mountains. Rain across southern Alaska with as low as it tracks eastward in toward Bristol Bay, in the front pushing in across Prince William Sound. And another nice day for the southeast coast. But rain pushes in sometime tomorrow night and into early Sunday. As the front weakens, as it pushes in, most of the moisture by the afternoon will be over in Canada. But periods of rain with the front hanging back along the North Gulf Coast. And then variably cloudy with a few showers in the central interior. Snow continues on the eastern north slope up to the Brooks Range, maybe extending down into the Kobuk Valley. Possibly that'll be pretty light if it does. Not too bad out over the Bering Sea with diminishing showers and higher pressure, and then a weak system coming into the west there with some rain for Shimei and Attu in the afternoon. Coastal water forecast for the south coast of the Panhandle, northwest winds at 10 knots. Kind of variable for the central coast, 10 to 15 knots. East-southeast 20 knots for the north coast. Lynn Canal, north winds 10 knots, and Stevens Passage and Clarence Strait, northwest at 10. And then on Sunday, Clarence Strait, winds swing around to the southeast and pick up to 20 knots with 4-foot seas. Stevens Passage, southeast at 10 knots. Lynn Canal, south breeze at 10 knots. And for the south coast, south to southwest, 15 knots. South winds 15 knots for the central coast, and up to the north here, southeast winds 15 to 20 knots. Prince William Sound, southeast winds 20 knots. And the North Gulf Coast, southeast winds 20 to 25 knots. Cook Inlet looking at northeasterlies at 20 knots. Barren Island, south at 20, southeast 15 with 5-foot seas for Kamishak Bay. And for Cook Inlet on Sunday, northwest winds 10 knots, 2 to 3-foot seas. Light variable wind conditions here for Kamishak Bay. North at 15 for the Barren Islands. And for the western North Gulf Coast, light winds, east side there, east at 15, east winds 15 knots for Prince William Sound. Kodiak Island, southwest winds 20 to 25 knots for Saturday. Alaska Peninsula, west-southwest winds 20 to 30 knots, and a light southeast wind at 10 knots for Bristol Bay. Then on Sunday, Bristol Bay, small craft advisories, west winds 25 knots. And west-northwest winds here for the Alaska Peninsula at 25 to 30 knots. Kodiak Island, west-northwest winds 15 to 20 knots with seas up to 7 feet. Central and eastern Aleutians, west winds 30 to 35 knots tomorrow with seas 10 to 16 feet. Western Aleutians, west-northwest winds 20 to 30 knots. And for Sunday, lighter winds actually from Kiska in response to that weak system. Kiska to Shimei, east-southeast winds 15 knots. Otherwise, Mchitka Island, west-northwest at 15 knots. Adak and Atka, west-northwest 20 knots. And the strongest winds will be over the Fox Islands or across the Fox Islands out of the west and northwest at 25 to 30 knots with seas 9 to 11 feet. And for the Kuskokwim Delta coast tomorrow, southeast winds at 10 knots. Yukon Delta, small craft advisory, southeast at 25 knots. And northwest winds 25 to 30 knots for Norton Sound and St. Lawrence Island, turning north at 30 for St. Matthew Island with 11-foot seas. Pribilof Islands, northwest winds 20 knots, seas 9 feet. And for the day on Sunday, Pribilof Islands, northwest 25 knots, 8-foot seas there. North at 25 for St. Matthew Island, northwest at 20 for the Kuskokwim Delta coast. Yukon Delta coast, St. Lawrence Island, north winds 25 knots, seas 5 feet. North at 20 knots for Norton Sound. Central and eastern Boulevard Sea coast tomorrow, brisk wind advisories, northeast winds 30 knots. Gale warnings here for the western Arctic coast for northeast winds 35 to 40 knots. Gale warnings for the Chukchi Sea, north to northeast winds 35 knots. And for Sunday, Chukchi Sea, north to northeast winds 30 knots. And for the western Arctic coast, Northeast 30 to 40 knots and 25 knot winds for the central and eastern Beaufort Sea coastline.